A teacher's calm dignity is put to the test when a rebellious student targets her with open disrespect in front of the entire class. Trevor Kane thinks his arrogance and family influence make him untouchable, pushing his new teacher further each day. But Ms. Lauren James isn't just any teacher. Her past as a former Marine holds lessons he could never anticipate. And just wait until you see how one moment of truth turned humiliation into justice, proving that real strength doesn't shout, it stands firm. The first rays of morning light crept across the polished floors of Riverdale High School, touching the edge of each desk like quiet promises of another ordinary day. Yet for the students of room 204, this day would mark the beginning of something far from ordinary. Ms. Lauren James arrived precisely 15 minutes before the first bell, as she always did. Her gray blazer was pressed, her hair pulled back neatly, and her voice carried the kind of calm assurance that seemed to straighten the atmosphere around her. She moved between the rows of desks, adjusting a misplaced chair here, collecting stray papers there. Every movement was purposeful. Nothing about her was rushed or uncertain. To her students, Lauren was new, a fresh face, but one that carried a depth they couldn't quite define. There was a quiet authority in her posture, a way she looked people directly in the eye when speaking, never dismissive, never timid. Her lessons were structured but alive. She didn't just teach history, she animated it. She spoke of human choices, of decisions made under pressure, of courage disguised as calm. Something in her voice made even the most restless students pause and listen, at least most of them. Trevor Kane, however, was different. Sitting toward the front with a restless air, he wore a designer jacket and the kind of expression that announced he was someone important, or at least thought so. His father's influence in the town was an invisible shield that had protected him from consequences most of his life. There was charm in his smile, but behind it hid impatience and pride. When Lauren called the class to order, Trevor barely looked up from his phone. She paused for only a moment, then continued the introduction to Roman leadership strategies. Her voice was smooth, her words deliberate, and when she explained the concept of discipline in the ancient world, Trevor laughed quietly. It was a subtle sound, but in a silent classroom it echoed. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Mr. Kane," she said, her tone firm yet even, "I'd appreciate your full attention." The sentence was calm, simple, but the message behind it was sharp. Trevor's friends giggled. He smiled as if amused by her courage to speak up. "Sure thing, Ms. James," he said, leaning back in his chair, like a king indulging a servant's request. Lauren studied him briefly. She didn't respond, didn't argue. She returned to the lesson with composure that made the moment feel smaller than he hoped, but the energy around them shifted. The class sensed a silent clash, and even those who laughed grew quiet. Throughout the rest of the hour, Trevor kept testing invisible boundaries, tossing quiet comments, tapping his pen loudly, dropping his books intentionally. Lauren continued unfazed, but her gaze occasionally flicked toward him, controlled, unreadable. Behind that calm expression lay years of endurance, of lessons neither textbooks nor classroom walls could contain. When the bell rang, the sound felt heavier than usual, slicing through the silence. Students packed their bags quickly, chatting nervously as they left. Trevor lingered for a moment, watching Lauren erase the board. "You take this job a little too seriously, don't you?" he said casually. She turned slightly, her eyes steady on him. "Learning deserves seriousness," she replied, her voice soft but unyielding. "That's how growth happens." Trevor shrugged and smiled without warmth. "Maybe," he said. "But not everyone here needs your kind of lessons." Lauren didn't answer. She simply looked at him, not with anger but something deeper, a quiet evaluation, then turned back to her books. His words didn't reach her the way he expected. Instead of offending, they rolled off her silence like pebbles thrown at stone. When Trevor walked out, the corridor light flickered against the rows of lockers, and his laughter echoed faintly. Several students passed her room and glanced in, whispering about how calm she always was. None of them realized that beneath that serenity was discipline built over years of service, years where calmness wasn't a choice, but survival. As Lauren gathered her notes, she looked toward the window where the morning light had grown stronger. Outside, the school lawn buzzed with chatter, buses arriving and footsteps rushing. She watched for a moment, then smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly. She loved teaching. Despite the challenges, it gave her purpose. But deep inside, where memory hid like a sleeping lion, she felt the faint stirring of a premonition. Something in Trevor's defiance wasn't just typical rebellion. It had weight, like a storm gathering just beyond sight. She closed her folder and sighed softly. "Discipline," she murmured under her breath, recalling the lesson she had just taught. "The one thing history never forgets." No one heard her words. The hallway was empty now, but the truth in them would soon echo far beyond these quiet walls, when her past, hidden under calm professionalism, would rise to meet the challenge her present had just begun to shape. Days passed, and the atmosphere in room 204 grew heavier with each lesson. Lauren's discipline and clear boundaries were noticed by all. Her teaching style attracted many students and won the quiet respect of staff. But for Trevor Kane, every correction felt personal, every calm word a challenge he could not tolerate. He started arriving late for class, glancing at Lauren with studied indifference. During roll call, he'd raise his hand with exaggerated slowness, sometimes inserting sly comments about her methods. "Are we learning history, or just how to follow orders here?" he'd muse aloud, his friends snickering by his side. Lauren never raised her voice, never shifted from her steady presence. Still, Trevor grew bolder. One afternoon during a group activity, he displaced another student's project, scattering papers across the table. When Lauren approached to remind him of classroom etiquette, Trevor replied, "Just trying to make things interesting, Miss James." At lunch, rumors about Trevor's behavior spread. Some students confided in Lauren, worried about the tensions. "He's just trying to get a rise out of you because he thinks he's untouchable," one junior said softly. Lauren thanked her and listened, but never discussed her own feelings. Instead, she remained supportive, offering advice on resilience and self-worth even when the topic strayed far from history. Every day, Trevor's provocations escalated. He cut Lauren off during lectures, made jokes that blurred lines of respect and decorum, and encouraged others to join in. What started as simple defiance evolved into carefully orchestrated interruptions designed to undermine her authority. His behavior was calculated, a test of strength, and Lauren sensed that he was searching for the moment when she might lose control. Despite it all, Lauren's response was always measured. She assigned him leadership roles in group activities, hoping to channel his energy constructively. She met with his parents, speaking honestly about expectations and the importance of respect. She communicated openly with her colleagues, sharing her strategies for keeping order and ensuring fairness. Yet the tension persisted, growing like vines through the cracks in the classroom's routine. Outside the classroom, Trevor's friends praised him for his boldness. He relished the attention, believing he had taken charge of the narrative. But within Lauren, the struggle was deeper. She reflected on her own journey, the battles she had fought, the strength she had forged. These experiences gave her patience, reminded her to avoid impulsive reactions. One Friday, after a particularly difficult lesson, Lauren lingered in the empty classroom. She cleaned chalk dust from her hands and gazed at the faded posters of historical leaders on the wall. Each figure had faced adversity, each name shaped by challenges and choices. The meaning of her daily discipline felt sharper in that moment. Outside, Trevor and his friends loitered near the school gates. Their laughter reached Lauren's ears as she walked out into the afternoon light. For a moment she paused, watching them. She wondered if any of them understood the weight of the test they set before her. Did they see her restraint as weakness, or would they one day recognize the true strength it required? Unseen by anyone, Lauren traced the scar along her wrist, a quiet reminder of what she had survived. She didn't wear her past on her sleeve, yet it fortified every patient answer, every unflinching gaze. She knew storms didn't last forever. Some ended with gentle rain, others with thunder. For now, she withstood Trevor's games, believing that steadfastness could transform even the harshest lessons into something lasting. As dusk settled over Riverdale High, Lauren stepped into the mild evening, her shadow tall against the glass doors. She carried more than her paperwork and folders. She carried resilience, forged in places no one in room 204 could imagine, and she was determined to see her students learn not just history, but the quiet courage needed to face their own. For Trevor, the contest was only entertainment. For Lauren, it was proof that true strength requires straining against adversity with patience and dignity, a lesson neither could truly understand until the moment for change arrived. A sudden cold snap swept through the city, and Riverdale High seemed quieter than usual. The tension that had brewed in room 204 now felt electric, humming between every word and gesture. It was as if the whole class anticipated that something would break. Lauren James sensed this unease. Her eyes were watchful, but her presence remained steady, anchoring the morning's lesson as the students filed in, coats dripping from a late autumn rain. Trevor Kane arrived last, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous energy. He dropped his backpack with a careless thud and exchanged glances with friends, the mischief in his smile dampened by the growing expectation in the room. Lauren began the lesson without acknowledgement, focusing on the board and speaking about turning points in American history, moments where people's choices changed everything, sometimes without warning. The class worked in small groups. Trevor, separated from his usual crowd, busied himself with pencils and papers, his attention wandering. Tension radiated from him, and a hush fell each time Lauren passed nearby. Suddenly, he seized an opportunity to create chaos. He swept the group's projects off the table, scattering notes and drawings onto the floor. A chorus of protests echoed, breaking the fragile order. Lauren turned, her composure unshaken. She knelt to help gather the papers, meeting Trevor's eyes with silent resolve. For a moment the room was filled with the sound of rustling papers and nervous breaths. Lauren stood and addressed the class gently, urging everyone to show respect for their peers' work. Her restraint, dignified and calm, was felt like a challenge, a line Trevor couldn't cross. But he was determined. His frustration spilled over as he approached Lauren, words hot with impatience. "You think you can fix everything by being calm?" he snapped, voice raised just enough for the class to freeze. Lauren looked at him, her gaze unflinching. The room was quiet. Everyone's attention burned onto the space between student and teacher. "Self-control is harder than anger," she replied. "It's the strongest answer there is." Trevor's face flushed. The silence grew, pressing against them all. In that charged moment he reached out and broke the boundary, grabbing Lauren's wrist in a sudden, impulsive act. The students cried out, shocked and afraid. But Lauren did not panic. In one smooth motion, she used her training to twist free, moving with precision and care to gently but firmly neutralize the situation without force. The moment did not last long. The intervention was swift, her strength hidden behind a mask of self-assurance and practiced calm. Her voice, low and steady, brought the class back from panic as she reassured the students and redirected their attention to safety and respect. Trevor, bewildered and shaken, stepped back. He realized the teacher he'd challenged was not vulnerable, but prepared and resilient in ways he'd never imagined. The others saw this, awe replacing the anxiety that had filled the room moments earlier. Quiet returned, underscored by the new understanding that Lauren was more than just a teacher. She was a guardian, stronger than any challenge that could arise. For Trevor, shock settled in where confidence once lived. For everyone in room 204, the day marked a turning point, steeped in the deeper lessons of dignity, control, and inner power, far more memorable than any history book could offer. For 2 days, Riverdale High buzzed like a hive stirred from quiet routine. The incident in room 204 had spread through the halls, morphing with every retelling. Some said that Miss James had stopped a confrontation with lightning reflexes. Others whispered that she had been a soldier, while a few simply said she was unshakable. What remained constant in every version of the story was the same realization. She had faced something no ordinary teacher could have handled and walked away with grace intact. Lauren came to school the next morning as she always did, early, punctual, composed. The principal had already spoken to her, apologizing for what had happened and insisting she take time off, but she declined politely. Her voice carried the kind of quiet steadiness that made arguments impossible. "The students need consistency," she said simply. "I'll be fine." When she entered room 204, the air felt different. Students who once lingered and joked before class now sat still, waiting. There was respect in their faces, but also curiosity. Lauren placed her materials on the desk, her movements unhurried, and began speaking as though nothing at all had happened. She reviewed essays, discussed historical themes, and asked questions that drew them willingly into the lesson. But beneath the quiet order, something deeper was happening. The students watched her not just as a teacher, but as a person transformed in their eyes, a symbol of strength cloaked in patience. Even Trevor Kane, who normally occupied his seat like a throne, stared at his notes, silent and thoughtful. After class, when the room had emptied, Trevor remained. The tension that had once crackled between them was gone, replaced by awkward hesitation. He stood by the door, his voice low but steady. "I wasn't thinking," he admitted. "I acted out of ego, not courage." Lauren looked up from the papers she was sorting. "Ego is easy," she said gently. "Control is the real test." She didn't scold him, she didn't have to. Her words settled over him like a long sigh after a storm. He nodded once, unable to meet her eyes for long. Later the principal called a school assembly. The official talk focused on empathy, accountability, and the importance of mutual respect. Yet the unspoken message lingered between every sentence, the lesson that dignity, calm, and quiet restraint could wield far greater power than loud defiance. In one corner of the auditorium, Lauren watched her students listening, feeling something shift within them. Over the following weeks, Trevor changed. His loudness softened into thoughtfulness. He began helping classmates, volunteering answers without mockery, sitting through lessons focused and respectful. The jokes disappeared, replaced by a sense of responsibility he had never shown before. Some of his friends teased him for it, but the difference was unmistakable. Occasionally he stayed after class, not to talk about grades, but about things he didn't understand before. "How do you stay calm when people push you?" he asked once, genuinely curious. Lauren paused, looking at the window where autumn light draped across the glass. "Because calm isn't weakness," she said finally. "It's clarity. When you stop fighting noise, you start hearing truth." He nodded slowly, as though trying to absorb the meaning. That conversation stayed with him long after he left the classroom. It wasn't long before word spread that the video captured during the altercation had gone viral online. News reports covered the story of the teacher with unbreakable calm. Comments poured in, praising her discipline and composure. Her past, a former Marine who had returned to civilian life to teach, came to light, revealing yet another layer of her resilience. The school administration issued a public statement of support, and parents wrote messages thanking her for being an example, not just to their children, but to adults as well. Lauren, however, did not dwell on the fame. Watching interviews about herself felt strange, detached, as though they were describing someone she used to be. The only recognition that mattered to her came quietly. Students who now greeted her with newfound respect. Staff members who looked to her as a model of steadiness in crisis. On one Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang, Lauren stood by the window of her classroom, watching students cross the courtyard. The trees beyond swayed under the fading light, leaves swirling like fragments of passing time. She thought of all the lessons she had taught, dates, wars, revolutions, and how often the bravest acts were not born of conflict, but of restraint. Trevor passed by, giving a simple nod of acknowledgement, and for the first time his gesture held humility. It was the quiet conclusion she had hoped for, not victory, not revenge, but change. When the halls grew silent, Lauren gathered her things and turned off the lights. The classroom seemed to glow faintly in the soft orange haze, filled with the echo of her students' voices, of lessons shared and tested. She closed the door gently behind her. Outside, the air was crisp, scented with rain. In the distance, children played near the steps, their laughter mingling with the hum of the city. Lauren walked to her car, her steps sure, each one measured and strong. The storm, once brewing quietly in her classroom, had passed, leaving in its wake the unmistakable calm of growth. Strength, she thought, wasn't in confrontation or control. It was in knowing when to stand firm, when to listen, and when to transform pain into purpose. She smiled faintly at the thought, opened her car door, and drove into the setting sun, the golden light stretching behind her like a promise that even in adversity, dignity endures.